Well, hi there. This is a twistwing fly, part of the insect order Strepsiptera. And during our recent phylogeny of insects, I promised that I would begin our next unusual mating strategies video with them. Because they're weird and horrifying. Which will be a bit of a recurring theme today. But in that video, I informed you that if you have ever been looking at an insect and it suddenly burst open and a bunch of smaller insects came flying out of it, they were likely one of the roughly 600 species of twistwing flies. I also casually tossed in there that they eat their mother to death, and I implied that these two horrors might not even be the most horrifying part of all when it comes to their reproductive habits. So happy early Halloween, because the day has come for us to talk about them. Obviously, this is a video that it's probably best to actually watch with your eyes and watch carefully, but usually when I'm watching YouTube, I'm really just listening to it while I do something else. I listen to YouTube quite a lot, and I do so almost always with my Raycon Everyday Earbuds, which have become a part of my everyday carry. I keep them on me virtually all of the time. They're really super comfortable. Earbuds don't always fit nicely, but they come with all kinds of different pads, different sizes, so you can find just the perfect one to fit your ear. I sometimes wear mine for hours at a time, and they stay put basically no matter what I'm doing. I mean, you know, like a lot of times I'm moving around, I'm walking, I'm running even. They're not falling out. One feature I really love, because I do use them so much, is their really long battery life. 32 hours. And recently they've improved them even more, adding active noise cancellation, which can totally make you feel like you're in your own world. It's perfect for long trips, especially if you're on an airplane or something like that, or just when I need to focus, which is often why I have my earbuds in. My favorite color is still the carbon black, but they come in a host of cool colors. My case is starting to get a little bit scuffed up because I carry it all the time. If I were smart like Jason, my case would still be perfect because it would have its own protective case. And here's the best part. You can get 20 to 50% off of your Raycon earbuds right now. Just head over to buyraycon.com/Clint or click the link down in the description. Obviously, I love these things, and I think you will too. Okay, so if you've ever seen one of these before, it was probably when a bunch of them burst out of some other insect and flew away like something from the movie Alien. And those were likely males. Because in the vast majority of species, only the male twistwing flies, which are more closely related to beetles than flies, can fly. What they can't do is feed. Yeah, once their flying days start, their eating days are over. Many of them have mouth parts that are modified into sensory structures because they don't need to feed. They need to breed. And that means that they need to find a lady. And the ladies look like this, like a grub. This is an example of neoteny, the retention of juvenile characteristics into adulthood, similar to what we see in many domesticated mammals. Adult female twistwing flies maintain essentially the larval form into adulthood. Male twistwing flies have crazy eyes, at least for an insect. They don't really have compound eyes, but instead have a small cluster of eyelets that each produce a complete image. Of course, female twistwing flies, they don't have eyes at all. They don't need them. They also lack wings and legs, and any sort of a hole through which sperm could be inserted. That's going to be an interesting problem to solve, but not the only one. And don't worry, all of the solutions are the most disturbing solutions possible. Where to begin? Let's start with a fertilized egg, and we'll end with how it got that way. So the eggs of twistwing flies are fertilized inside of the mother somehow. And that is where they hatch, since the mother has no way of laying them. I told you that there was more than one problem. So the babies hatch inside of their mother. They are, at this point, called a planidium larva. Now, hatching internally is not that unusual for animals. Ovoviviparity is fairly common. What is uncommon is everything after that. Uncommon and horrifying. So the babies do not just wait around in the body cavity of the female until they're born. They really can't be born. Instead, they cruise around in the circulatory fluid of their mother. Insects have an open circulatory system, and their circulatory fluid generally does not transport oxygen, and so it isn't really blood. It's called hemolymph. And the space where it resides is called the hemocoel. So they cruise around in the hemocoel of their mothers. Weird and a touch disturbing, but not horrifying, arguably. So they can just cruise around inside of the body of their mother. And while many adult insects do not feed, juveniles must feed. They have to grow if they're ever going to reproduce themselves. But gosh, what are they going to eat? I mean, they're trapped inside of their mothers. I guess the only option is to eat the insides of their mothers. So they do. A lovely practice called matrophagy, which means mother eating, so it's pretty appropriate. Of course, mom may have thousands of cute little planidium larvae consuming her alive. So obviously there won't be enough mom to feed them all until they're her size. Or at least the size that she was when, the internal consumption began.
You are alive when they start to eat you.
At this point, they need to find a new source of food. So they burst out of their mother's head, leave her host because she too is a horrifying endoparasite of other insects, and start frantically looking for a new host. Many are parasites of bees and other wasps, so they just pop out at the hive and start looking for a juvenile to embed themselves into. Others that parasitize things like true bugs or silverfish, they have to look a bit harder. But once they find a new host, they just dig into the new host by secreting enzymes that soften the cuticle, and in they go. Once inside, they molt into a legless, eyeless, essentially tiny version of their mothers. At which point, they induce a response from their host that makes the host produce a little pocket of tissue in which the happy little mother-eating, head-popping monster can feed upon the hemolymph of its new host. Not killing it like they did their mother, but taking up to 90% of the space in their host's abdomen and stealing nutrients constantly. By the way, having more than one larval form is called hypermetamorphosis. Anyway, after moving into a new host's tissue pocket, they continue to grow and molt, but they do not emerge from the previous cuticles, they just keep layering up. Until they either pupate and emerge as winged males, or molt directly into a neotenous female. Because remember, females are basically just sexually mature larvae. At this point, the males leave behind the host of their youth and their feeding days entirely. Leave behind all of their days. Many only live a few hours as adults, which is why they need all of those sensory structures. They need to find a female quickly. The females release pheromones that attract the males. And in a form of cruel mockery, given that the hosts of twist-wing flies are almost always made sterile by the presence of the flies, males come and mate with the females as they stick portions of their bodies out of the cuticle of their hosts. Now, we did mention a little slight complication. There is no opening for sperm to enter the female's body cavity. And since they don't have the ability to teleport sperm inside of her, the males just spear their genitalia right through the side of the female and insert sperm in a process called traumatic insemination, and the whole process begins anew. Haven't we learned some fun terms that are difficult to incorporate into polite conversation? So there you have it. This seems like a case of everybody loses. Like, who are the winners here? But that's the thing about evolution. It doesn't make ideal organisms, just organisms that make more of themselves. By any means necessary. So let's talk about some other strange means, shall we? I'm not sure that we feel like male strepsipterans get a great deal, but I think we all sort of feel bad for the females for sure. So let's talk about something that'll make us feel worse for the fellas. Gynogenesis and the Amazon molly, Pisalia formosa. So Amazon mollies, they're all females. And we talked about many ways that you can have female-only species in our last video. But these guys, or rather ladies, do things a bit differently. You see, it turns out that they need sperm to reproduce, which might seem like a real problem. And it is. Fortunately, these aren't strepsipterans, so they don't have to solve this problem in the most horrifying way imaginable. But they do have to solve this problem. And the way that they solve this problem is by mating with males of 4 closely related species, which is a solution, but then you would think that their offspring would all be hybrids. But they're not, because they do not incorporate the genetic material from the sperm into the baby. They just need the sperm. The DNA is destroyed before it can fuse with that of the egg. That would normally be a problem because the genome would be cut in half every generation. Eggs generally only have half of the number of chromosomes that the female possesses. The sperm delivers the other half. But Amazon molly eggs contain all of the chromosomes of the mother. They are diploid, like mom, not haploid like most eggs. So in the rare case that the DNA of the sperm does get through, the result is a triploid hybrid, which is 1.5 times the number of chromosomes of a typical molly, which is why the DNA of the sperm needs to be destroyed. Having the genome grow by 50% every generation is also not sustainable. You quickly run into deadly dosage effects where they're making too much of the protein products coded for by the DNA because they have so many copies of each chromosome. So they only need the sperm to activate development of the egg, not to complete the genome, which means that mating confers a clear benefit to the female Amazon mollies, but no direct benefit to the male. She essentially parasitizes him of his sperm. And this is a crazy thing, but this system seems to have persisted for around 500,000 generations, where most parthenogenic lineages go extinct within 10,000 to 100,000 generations due to accumulation of deleterious mutations that cannot easily be eliminated from the population, and a lack of genetic variation, making changes in the environment potentially catastrophic for asexual lineages. They evolve rather often because parthenogenic all-female species pass on twice as many of their own genes to their offspring and produce twice as many females compared to sexually reproducing species, so their offspring can have more total offspring. From a fitness standpoint, they're amazing, at least until they aren't. But that's the thing about evolution. It doesn't make future plans, just organisms that make more copies of their genes. But parthenogenesis is almost always an evolutionary dead end, but not so far in this case, which is pretty amazing. So Amazon mollies definitely show us that males are a bit of a liability, though often a very necessary one for the long-term persistence of species. Last time we discussed why males are often smaller than females. This is because of the fundamental difference between males and females. The universal difference between males and females is that males produce tiny reproductive cells, gametes, and females produce comparatively enormous gametes. And the reason that these two extremes have been so successful is because if you make big gametes, well, the cost is that you can't make many of them. So if both sexes made huge gametes, they'd rarely find one another. If you make tiny gametes, well, those are good finders, but the cost is that they don't have very much of the things that make long-term survival likely. So if both sexes made tiny gametes, they would find one another all the time, but quickly die. And intermediate-sized gametes run into both of these problems. Better finders than eggs, but not much better. And better survivors than sperm, but not as much better as a huge egg. So the strategy that has worked is to have some individuals in the population make big survivors, and others make lots of little finders. And the thing is that large females can make far more eggs than can small females. So there's a big direct benefit to being large as a female. The cost is just that it takes time to get large, so you're more likely to die before reproducing if you get very large before maturing. The same is not the case for males. A very small male can make plenty of sperm, so males often mature early at a small size. And this is what we see in many species, such as the black widows that we discussed last time. But what would really be amazing would be if an organism that grew up to be a large female, that could produce many eggs, could still reproduce somehow while it was young. Say, as a male. Which is exactly what happens in clownfishes. While they're young, they're males. And they live in a primarily size-based hierarchy where the largest individual is a female. And should she die or be otherwise removed from the area, then the largest male turns into a female. They are what you would call a sequential hermaphrodite. And this explains, well, why all of the babies of Marlin and Coral were to be given male names. Nemo and Marlin Jr. And I suspect that the continued presence of Dory is the only reason that the sequel wasn't called Finding Marilyn. But as you know, sometimes males are not smaller than females. Sometimes they're much larger. And that generally occurs when males compete with other males for access to mates. In this case, it is the males that run the big "you might die before you're large enough to mate" risk. That said, males that do get big enough to compete effectively for mates often produce far more offspring than do females. So there is a benefit to being a large male. This is the case with lots of animals, like Asian sheepshead wrasse, for example. Males fight for access to large harems of comparatively small females. The benefit of being a female is not the total number of offspring that you can possibly produce, but the fact that since you possess the limiting resource, eggs, it's much more likely that you will get a chance to reproduce. In species with large males, generally, most males, they don't get to reproduce much, if at all. Only a few true giants have all the success. So if you're anything but huge, it'd be better to be a female than a male. That's exactly what happens in Asian sheepshead wrasse. While they're small, they're females, experiencing moderate but consistent reproductive success. If they survive long enough to become very large, they, as another serial hermaphrodite, become males, and then have the chance for outlandish success. And while we're on the subject, let's talk about possibly the weirdest reproductive strategy of all, ours. We're really weird. So in general, females, as the possessors of the limiting resource, are what you would call the choosy sex. Reproduction is not expensive for males, so they'll rarely balk at an opportunity. But females should be more selective, as the cost of reproduction can be quite high. As a result, females tend to be well adapted to just surviving in their environment. Reproductive success is nearly guaranteed if they can stay alive. So they're adapted to do just that. But males are not guaranteed reproductive success just for being alive. They need access to females, which may require combat with other males, or they may need to somehow impress the females that they manage to reach, which may require spectacular physical features or abilities. Characteristics associated directly with reproduction are called primary sexual characteristics. But those associated with gaining access to mates, but that are not directly involved in reproduction, are called secondary sexual characteristics. Both males and females have primary sexual characteristics. But generally, secondary sexual characteristics are far more pronounced in the sex that pays the lower price for reproduction. And that's the funny thing about humans. Which sex is the one with the most conspicuous attributes associated primarily with gaining access to or attracting the other sex? Males? Females? Both? The answer is both. Both male and female humans have distinct and different pronounced secondary sexual characteristics, which is super weird. But let me tell you why. For starters, as you could probably tell if you saw our Pet Guide to Human Children, the cost of reproduction for male and female humans can be very high. This is the lowest scoring pet we've ever covered. But in addition to this, both males and females have great reason to be the choosy sex, just not at the same time. Let me explain. If we're talking about a casual sexual encounter, the possibility exists, well, that an offspring will be produced. If so, the female will now endure a pregnancy, birth, and decades of parental care for that offspring, potentially with no help from the male whatsoever. The male, on the other hand, would get to pass on his genes at the cost of an evening, a little sperm, and the risk of disease that's always involved with close, intimate interaction with other members of your species. So for him, the risk is comparatively small. For her, the risk is massive. And for both, the reward is the same. The potential for one offspring. So when it comes to casual sexual encounters, it behooves females to avoid such encounters unless the male appears to be of a quality that would be difficult to access under more ideal circumstances. Because the ideal situation for the female is that the male then sticks around forever and helps you and you alone to survive and raise that offspring. But such a partnership comes at the cost to the male of an untold number of low-cost opportunities to reproduce. So if he's going to dedicate all of his efforts to the offspring that he can sire with a single female instead of an untold number of others, then it behooves him to choose a mate of a quality that would be difficult to access without the additional promise of his assistance in raising offspring. So when it comes to casual sexual encounters, female humans tend to be the choosier sex and the less inclined to engage. And when it comes to commitment to monogamous sexual relationships, males tend to be the choosier sex and the less inclined to engage. And as a consequence, selection in humans has favored distinct but different secondary sexual characteristics in both males and females. And maybe I'll leave it right here to see how much outrage this alone sparks before I explain this in even more detail. I'm honestly not really sure if outrage makes me want to dig in more or less, but I'd love to know if you want to know more about this in the future. But for now, let's talk about one more. I have to let you know, my list of crazy reproductive strategies is growing faster than I'm covering these. So let me know how often you would like to see videos on this subject down in the comments. But today has been a heck of a day, and I think we should end on a high note. So, why not talk about penis fencing? And we'll talk about it in the flatworms of the genus Pseudobiceros, which are a gloriously beautiful and amazing genus, especially for something called a worm. And I do want to draw attention to the species Pseudobiceros bedfordi, but just because it was named by a Laidlaw. Specifically, the British biologist Frank Fortescue Laidlaw, who might be more closely related to you than he is to me. I'm the first person born as a Laidlaw in my lineage, but it's still pretty cool. I mean, I only know 10 living Laidlaws, counting myself, and 6 of them live at my house. But anyway, back to penis fencing. Actually, back to personal story time with Clint. When I was in high school, we had an assignment to make a poster regarding a line from Romeo and Juliet that we found particularly impactful. And I only remember one of these posters to this day, and it wasn't mine. Not, O Romeo, wherefore art thou, Romeo? Not a pox upon both your houses, but a poster that left my English teacher in tears when its likely intent was pointed out to her by another teacher. My English teacher who later became my speech coach, which allowed me to overcome my natural shyness, which is probably a huge part of the reason that this channel exists. My naked weapon is out. Now in the play, this meant that his sword was drawn, but that's probably not what it meant to the 14-year-old boy that deemed it so impactful. And generally, a phallus is a pretty lousy weapon to bring to a sword fight. Listen, by this point in this video, you can probably see that there's a very good chance that it will be demonetized. And so if you want to see more content like this in the future, please consider supporting us on Patreon so we can. I mean, you can't stab someone meaningfully with a phallus. Well, I mean, unless you're a twistwing fly or a flatworm. And here's the thing. Female twistwing flies want to be stabbed. They're dropping pheromones just begging the mobile males to use one of their few remaining minutes to give them a good stabbing. But not the flatworms. They're generally trying to avoid being penis stabbed, which you would think would mean that females are avoiding opportunities to reproduce. And you'd be somewhat right. But then again, as females isn't the only way that they can mate, because they are also males. I mean, every individual. We have learned about a couple of sequential hermaphrodites today. Well, these flatworms are simultaneous hermaphrodites. They are males and females all at the same time. They simultaneously make large and small gametes. Now, you probably remember that reproduction is more costly for females than it is for males. So in every encounter with a member of your species, there's the opportunity to either have expensive offspring or cheap ones. But everyone's naked weapon will be out. It's like one of those games of tag where everyone's it. Except instead of tagging with hands, they stab you with a spear-like penis and you end up pregnant if you lose. A process called intradermal hypodermic insemination. Another term to add to your repertoire of awkward things to bring up at fancy dinners. Though if you forget it, traumatic insemination works here too. The winners jab their two-headed intermittent organs called stylets into the hemocoel of the rival, and just like that,
you are now carrying my child.
But how?
It is the mystery of the dance.
sometimes only one wins. Sometimes everyone's a winner. Everyone always leaves a parent. Sometimes a mom, sometimes a dad, sometimes both. So we started with a situation where selection made everyone a loser, and we're ending with everyone a winner. And both involve traumatic insemination.
Well, isn't that special?
As always, like and subscribe. We hope to see you real soon. Please come back.
She's already inside of another...
Yeah. They're like nesting dolls.
You're kidding me! That's insane!
We'll get to how she got there.
I'm just baffled. I don't know what to say.
They need to find a female inside of another host.
Well, she's kind of poking out.
What do you mean she's poking out? For reals?
Yeah. Just part of her.
Hold on.
Yes. Pause! Hold on. Why not talk about penis fencing?
Demonetized.
Usually capture the fly, but we can do it both ways.
You do that often.
Yeah.
Has there been a scenario where you didn't think you caught it, but you actually did?
It's always a risk.
Because it's pretty quick.
Yeah.
You don't wait.
No. And generally, a phallus is a pretty lousy weapon to bring to a sword fight.
Oh, jeez.
Clint.
We're so gonna get demonetized. Oh, jeez. That should be your Patreon pitch.
This might get demonetized. Yeah, I think.
Please support us.
I think so. It's like one of those games of tag where everyone's it. Except instead of tagging with hands, they stab you with a spear-like penis and you end up pregnant if you lose.
I hate